Hey witches, welcome to Busy, Gritty, Inked and Witchy, a magical living podcast for the busy witch. I'm Morgan, eclectic witch of almost 25 years, Avalon priestess, and busy witch. Here we'll talk all things witchy, from current metaphysical happenings to my busy witch tips and tricks, and everything in the in-between. This podcast is my personal journey, filled with my knowledge, opinions, and unique way of looking at the world. Join me as I weave the magical and the mundane in every episode. Hey witches, Morgan here. Now before you get started with this week's episode, I do have a disclaimer. I do mispronounce a word pretty badly in this week's episode, and it is because I've only ever read the word and I've never heard the word spoken aloud. I do make reference to having first learned this word when I took 4 years of Latin, but you guys, Latin is a dead language. We didn't speak Latin in Latin class. We read it and wrote it. So, for many years, I have mispronounced the word tome, and I have mispronounced it as tome, because apparently I thought, it's a scholarly text, so I'm going to make it all prestigious and bougie and call it a tome, because tome is just boring. Well, it's just pronounced tome. So, I do apologize for the mispronunciation, and when you get to that part of the podcast episode, and every time you hear me mispronounce it, because I mispronounce it 16 times, just think, she's never heard it before, she's only ever read it, and it is pronounced tome. So I want to thank you all for your understanding, and I will let you get to this week's episode. Hey witches, welcome back to Busy, Gritty, Inked and Witchy. I'm Morgan, and today I am talking about grimoires, books of shadows, and other magical texts. I have something very exciting happening behind the scenes here at Ink Eyes Creations, Ink Spirit, in my witchy business life. So stick around to the end of the episode for the announcement, which does go along with today's episode, which was chosen by Patreon members. I gave them a nice little poll a couple of weeks ago when I took the week off. And this was, I think, the number one, at least at the time of recording, this was the number one poll result that they wanted, was the difference between grimoires, books of shadows, and then I'm going to throw in other magical texts just for you all to know. So what I'm going to cover in this episode, so magical record keeping is pretty important, but I do get asked all the time, what's the difference between a grimoire, a book of shadows, and then there are some other things like journals. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to go over the differences, the different types of magical texts, and why you should be using at least one of them in your witchcraft practice. Like why magical record keeping is so important. Okay, so let's just dive right in. There are, I would say, three main magical texts when it comes to witchcraft, Wicca, that kind of thing. Okay, the first one is a grimoire. The second one is called a book of shadows. And the third one is a tome, which is Tome. There are like supplemental or smaller types of magical texts, which would include a book of mirrors. If you've never heard of that, it's going to be really fun. I'm going to share that. Dream journal, a divination journal, a meditation journal. There's like herbal, grimoire journals, spell journals, all that kind of thing. So basically, you've got your grimoire, your book of shadows, your tome, and then different journals for different subjects, okay? So the three main ones, a grimoire is like a more formal structured book containing spell recipes, correspondences, and magical knowledge, okay? So historically, grimoires were used by occultists, alchemists, and ceremonial magicians. But basically, you can think of a grimoire as a magical reference book rather than a journal. So this is where you are probably just going to keep your basic information. You're going to keep your correspondences, okay? And it's like a reference book. So a grimoire you would go through and you'd be like, okay, let me look up the things for herbs, the properties of this herb, or I want to do a money spell. Let me look up the stuff here. Okay. That's a grimoire. The next is a book of shadows, which if a grimoire is like structured and is basically a reference book of correspondences, your book of shadows is more personal. It is reflective. It's used to track your knowledge, but also your experiences, your rituals, your spells, your growth, your transformations, your spiritual journey. Okay. So the Book of Shadows often includes notes on spell outcomes. You can include dreams in a Book of Shadows, intuitive downloads, meditations, and you can also include knowledge. So you can have like your moon phases, and you have the knowledge of the moon phases, like what type of magic you should be practicing during the full moon or the waning moon. And then under that, or within that section of your Book of Shadows page, would be your personal experiences, and date them. Definitely. That is super important for any type of record keeping. If you're going to, do things like spells and rituals and you want to have a record of them, 100% date them. And I would even add the moon phase. Even if you're not big in the moon, just look it up. Like, okay, on this date, I did this money drawing spell, and this is what I used. This is what, this is what I used. These are the ingredients. These are the words I said, stuff like that. But I would include 100% the date, and then moon phase. You could even include day of week if you wanted to, any type of information that could help you in the future. So all of that is going to be your Book of Shadow page, or your Book of Shadows. This term was popularized by Gerald Gardner and Wicca, which is, a branch of paganism. But it is now used widely to just describe a witch's book, a witch's journal, like a big witch's journal, So that's generally what a Book of Shadows is. And then I have been introduced to the word tome. For me, it was something that I would say I was introduced more like when I took 4 years of Latin in high school. So they talked a lot about tomes and, like as far as like historical texts. But a lot of witches are reclaiming the word. They're saying that their grimoire, their Book of Shadows, they're putting it all together into their tome, which is like their end all be all, like every bit of my magical knowledge is in this book. So what a tome is a large book, often scholarly, ancient, and filled with deep knowledge. So it's like old grimoires, ancient book of spells, sacred texts. So like if we're in Hollywood, we're watching a movie and somebody goes into this ancient cave type thing, maybe it was booby trapped by God knows who, and they get through all of it, and there's this book of ancient knowledge of the Fountain of Youth or the Necronomicon, which we'll talk about here in a second. But this is down in some catacombs, underneath, like 17 stories underneath the streets above. That would be a tome, and it has all the power of the universe in it. Like that's when you hear the word tome, that's kind of the image that it elicits. It's the most structured of the three, because it's supposed to contain comprehensive knowledge. So that's why a lot of witches are reclaiming that word for themselves, because they're like, I'm going to write everything in one place. It's going to be everything I've ever learned, every ritual I've ever done, every spell, all the knowledge I have to create spells, all the ingredients, all of it's going to go into this one huge book, and that's my tome. And then they're probably going to pass it on to someone else, so that's why you're creating this huge comprehensive book of all of your knowledge, is to pass on to like future generations. Okay. Historical, as far as like famous tomes, include the Key of Solomon, the Picatrix, excuse me if I did not pronounce that correctly, and then the Necronomicon, which is actually a fictional book, but I think we all, if you've been in witchcraft for a little bit, you've at least heard of it. It is the Book of the Dead. It is a fictional book, actually, that came from a horror writer, H.P. Lovecraft. But it if you've ever seen the Evil Dead movies, that's the Necronomicon. So supposedly it's made of human flesh, and when you open it and you read the things and you do the spells within it, you can raise the dead back to living. It is fictional, but it has been used in practical ways in witchcraft now. It has it does have information within it that can be used for actual witchcraft practices. And it's nothing like the Evil Dead. We talked about necromancy back in the Untamed Witchcraft podcast episode. So it's nothing like that, but you can actually buy the Necronomicon now at like any occult bookstore. Like you can buy recent editions of it. I think I had one for years, never read it. I just had it on my bookshelf. I think I finally got rid of it a couple of months ago, just because I was like, well, I'm never going to read this, so someone else probably can and get something out of it. But yeah, those would be examples of tomes. Okay, the Key of Solomon, the Picatrix. It's got to be Picatrix. Picatrix. It's got to be Picatrix. So if you're looking for like ancient knowledge, like you want to read historical accounts of like what the alchemists were doing in like the 1500s. Okay, you would pick up like the Key of Solomon or the Picatrix and just try and read it, because it's going to be in some weird language, very hard to understand, maybe translated loosely. But that's what a tome is. Okay. So supplementally speaking, like if those are the three big ones, grimoire, book of shadows, and a tome, you do have smaller ones. Okay. And you don't have to do any of these. You can actually incorporate some of these into a bigger text. Okay. But one of them is called the Book of Mirrors. And I dove into the Book of Mirrors last year, I believe. And I actually started one for a while that I kept up with. I don't keep up with it anymore, just because life, you guys. Anyway, so the Book of Mirrors is a deeply personal journal used for self-reflection, inner work, tracking your spiritual growth, noting synchronicities and intuitive messages or downloads for the purpose of building your intuition. Okay. This is where you're going to do your shadow work. This is where you are going to document your upgrades, your shifts of energy, your transformations, your spiritual growth, your epiphanies, your up-leveling, like whatever. This is all about your spiritual journey. Okay. So you can include things like messages that you receive, whether through meditation, dreams, just talking one-on-one with your higher self, your deities, spirits, guides, whoever. You include synchronicities. I loved doing that. So the more that you pick up on synchronicities and you record them, then the more evidence you're giving to build your intuition. So things like if you happen to look up one day and the clock is 4:44 or 5:55 or 2:22, and you make note of it. If you have a Book of Mirrors, I mean, you can even keep one on your phone, which we'll get to that in a second too. You just make a note of it. And you're basically, it's like a nod to the universe, like, hey, I see the synchronicities happening. I'm going to acknowledge them. So therefore that opens me up to seeing more synchronicities and helping me build my intuition. So this can even be things like you have a dream one night with a raven in it. And then the next morning you walk out, to your driveway and there's a huge raven just sitting in the driveway staring at you like, hey, what's up? So you would write that down in your Book of Mirrors because you were given the dream first and here it became a part of your reality. So that's going to help build evidence for you that you can trust your dreams. You can trust your gut. You can trust your intuition. You're looking at the world through a different lens and you're open to signs and symbols from the universe. Okay. So that's the purpose of a Book of Mirrors. Of course, all of that can go in your Book of Shadows. You can have an entire section in your Book of Shadows of just handwritten journaling like stuff, There's also like specific journals that you can keep, such as a dream journal, a divination journal, meditation journal, a spells journal where you actually just write your spells and nothing else. Herbal grimoires are like an herbal journal where you're writing down tinctures. And like if you're a green witch and you want to start getting into the healing properties of herbs, that can be like an herbal journal. So all of these are basically, I would say if you want to keep these, but you also want to have a grimoire or a book of shadows, then the little journals would be like your work in progress. So it's kind of like all your notes. Maybe you're trying to figure out a recipe for a calendula salve that, will heal scratches or whatever. And you haven't quite got the recipe yet. So you would do all your journaling in like your herbal journal. And then once you get that recipe solidified and you're like, this is it, then you would move the recipe over to your grimoire or your book of shadows. So I would say if you wanted to keep little journals, they would be smaller ones that you can keep near you, like a dream journal you would keep in your bedside table or on your bedside table. So when you have those dreams, you write them down. Then let's say that dream comes true. You would transfer that whole scenario of the dream that you had plus how it manifested in real life. You would move that over to your book of shadows or over to your book of mirrors. But you could have a dream journal just to quickly jot stuff down. Okay, so that would be the purpose of smaller text, like a meditation journal, dream journal, divination. So if you wanted to do daily card pulls, but then let's say one of these card pulls one day is like you interpret it this way, and then by the end of the day, all this crazy shit has happened that directly related. You might want to take that whole day and be like, this is part of my spiritual journey. Like I interpreted the cards this way and that's exactly what happened. Hell yeah. And you move that over to your book of mirrors or to your book of shadows and write it down with the date. Like this is what happened on this day. Okay. You can also have a witch's almanac, which thankfully Llewellyn prints one for us every year. It's called the Witch's Almanac, which is a dated or calendar-based journal or book for tracking cosmic influences, spell timing, weather patterns, astrological transits, etc. So if you wanted to keep track of all of that, you could start your own Witch's Almanac, or you could just purchase Llewellyn's, because let me tell you, they're pretty good. So, and then again, that would be more, I would say, information-based, so more like a grimoire. And yeah, those are like the supplemental smaller types of magical texts that you can keep up with. Okay. In this day and age, any of these, your grimoire, your book of shadows, your dream journal, your book of mirrors, your tome, whatever. Well, I would say actually a tome is specifically supposed to be a physical book. I will say that. So let's take tome out of there. Okay. But your grimoire, your book of shadows, your book of mirrors, your herbal journal, your divination journal, your dream journal, all of these can be physical. So you can have a journal that you hand write in every time you want to update it, or you have a binder. You have a scrapbook. Yeah. Any of those. And you physically are handwriting in there. It can be digital, so it can 100% be online. I actually know of quite a few witches in our Ink Spirit Coven that use Pinterest as their digital book of shadows, and I love it. Oh my God, I love it. Or it can be a hybrid. So like you can handwrite stuff down, and then once you're going to transfer it into a physical book of shadows, you then are typing it up to keep it digitally, or you're typing it up to design a gorgeous little page, and then you're printing it out and you're putting it in your physical book of shadows. Like if you have a witchy binder type thing. Okay. So in this day and age, all of them apply. If you are a tech witch, keep your stuff online, and you, God, even on just Canva, you can design a book of shadows page like a scrapbook style with your spell on it and clip art and everything, and then save it as a PDF and move it over to a digital book of shadows, to like a Google Drive if you wanted to enchant your Google Drive. In this day and age, do it. Keep it on your phone. keep it on Pinterest, keep it in Google Drive, keep it in Dropbox, whatever you want to do. Or if you're old school like me, you want to be handwriting stuff out or sitting down and like scrapbooking, then by all means do that. Or you can do a hybrid of both. Okay. So why are magical texts and magical record keeping important? Number one, magical record keeping helps you document what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Okay. If you have a spell that 100% worked, like let's say it was a money drawing spell, and immediately you cast the spell and within a week you received your tax returns, your refund, which they were like, oh, that's not going to be to you for another month. And bam, it shows up the next week. If you didn't write down what you did, like what herbs you used, what candle, what words you said, then the next time you want to go do that spell, you're going to be like, ah, shit. I speak from experience, okay? I am a horrible record taker. It is so funny. It's not funny. So the announcement that I have coming up here in a couple of minutes, like one of the reasons that I'm doing what I'm doing is because I want to become a better record taker. And so for me, instead of just attempting to do it, I hold myself accountable by launching it as something bigger that I have to be accountable for. Yeah, because I have done so many spells in over 25 years of being a witch. I have done so many spells and they've worked or they haven't worked. And then it's like, oh my God, I don't ever want to recreate that. That spell blew up in my face. Now, what did I do? You know, I have no idea. So that's the first thing that magical record keeping does for you is you can even chart. I will say at one point, like I started to chart moon phases, okay, and my energy levels, right? So I was born during a full moon and I have found out that during certain full moons, I am super high energy. And then there's other full moons that I am super low energy. So it was through charting and magical record keeping that I was able to see those correlations. And therefore, then I could write them in my date planner coming up. Like, okay, I've charted this before. These are my high energy times of the month. These are my low energy times of the month, or these are my high energy months. And I can plan accordingly. I can plan to rest more during my low energy months and get more shit done during my high energy months. So that's the main reason. And I think any of the other reasons are almost like bullet points under that reason is you are trying to create for yourself spells and rituals that work for you. They may not work for everyone, but they work for you. And how do you know what works for you if you are not writing shit down? If you are not sitting there and going, okay, during the full moon phase, I am so high energy, so let me do this. You know, and especially it's super important for beginner witches because there's so much misinformation out there, or there's so many different people telling you how they practice. You know, I will take the full moon as a beautiful example. I teach my members of the Ink Spirit Coven and I teach beginner witches to not release at the full moon. The moon is at full power. You are at full power. And so therefore you should be adding a boost of energy to the intentions you set at the new moon. That is what I teach. And I know I said the word should, but that is what I believe. And that is what works for me. Some people do release at the full moon. That is what works for them. And when you're a beginner witch, you're sifting through all this information. You need to write down like what works for you, what doesn't work for you, so that you can then be firm in your practice. We have a lot of members of the Ink Spirit Coven who are like, I am so drained during the full moon. I can't even think about doing magic. Like, is that bad? Is that wrong? And I'm like, no, you are low energy at full moons. Don't do any magic when you are low energy. Figure out which moon phase you are high energy at, and that's when you do your spells. That's when you do your rituals. And so you alleviate shame. You alleviate guilt associated with, oh my God, it's the full moon. I should be out there manifesting, but I have zero energy. That's your personal ebb and flow, and you have to honor that. You know what works for you, and it's not going to be what works for everyone else. It's not going to even be what works for me. But if you don't try it, you don't know. And if you don't keep a record of it and you don't write it down, like during the full moon, I felt like shit. Then the next full moon, you're going to be like, okay, let's try and do this. You're going to feel like shit again. And you're going to have that shame and that guilt set into you. Like, oh my God, I didn't do anything under the full moon again. Whereas if you would have just written it down and gone back and looked and been like, okay, oh no, right here, last month, I tried to do this during the full moon and I felt like shit. Never mind. We're not going to do that again. We're not going to do it. So that's the most important thing. Everything else is bullet points under that. You can learn, you can keep track of knowledge by magical record keeping. You know, what herbs worked for you, what candle colors worked for you, what candle types worked for you, what words, like when you did a spell, did you rhyme it? Did that work? Did that feel witchy? Did that feel horrible? And you're like, oh my God, that sounded cheesy and I never want to do that again. What worked for you? What didn't? You can personalize your practice. That's 100% why we're doing this. And then you can also track your spiritual growth. So if you're writing everything down, then you can look back at the beginning and you could be like, oh my gosh, I used to start with a single candle and a tumbled stone in my spells, and they were all right. But like, I'm manifesting huge shit now. And it's because like, oh, I've got this set up. I've got this. Or I started rhyming my spells. I stopped rhyming my spells. I started, manifesting during the full moon. I started resting during the full moon. But you could, whatever it is, you have a record of it because you wrote it down. And you can track how you used to not have confidence at all when it came to your spells. And now you're like, hell yeah, I'm going to manifest this shit. So that's a beautiful journey as well that magical record keeping helps you with. Okay. So your Book of Shadows, your grimoire, whatever you want to call it. And let me tell you, if you want to call your Book of Shadows your grimoire or vice versa, like you have a grimoire, you're keeping your magical knowledge in it, but you also want to journal in it, but you love the word grimoire, call it a grimoire, okay? Don't just throw the definitions out the window. The definitions I'm here teaching you today are for magical knowledge. I'm here to give you the tools that you can then apply to your practice as it feels right for you, okay? So call your magical journal whatever the hell you want to call it, okay? Call it a Book of Shadows, call it a Book of Mirrors, call it a grimoire, whatever resonates with you, call it that. Call it your, Morgan's badass witchy shit journal, whatever you want to call it, call it that, okay? You can keep it organized, you can keep it random, okay? If you do want to keep it more organized, you can have different sections for things like herbs. All of your information about herbs, their correspondences, what herbs you've worked with, what herbs you're allergic to, whatever it is, keep them all there. Your crystals, spells, moon phases, sabbats. I have no idea. That word is rituals in my notebook. That is a very fun way of writing rituals when I was writing my notes. That looks like kitabs is what that looks like. Anyway. So you can have different sections, and you can keep everything organized, or you can just have one big old journal and you're just writing everything willy-nilly, whatever you want to do, whatever works for you. Just to let you know too, which I'm going to go in a little bit more with hold on, let me switch pages. With my Patreon bonus content is like different styles of Book of Shadows. I'm actually going to do a show and tell with them in the bonus content. But you can have a journal, a flat out journal that you're just writing everything in. A lot of witches use 3-ring binders now. And that way you can print out or type up stuff, put them in sheet protectors maybe. If you scrapbook, you can use scrapbooks for it. So there's a lot of different options if you want to have a physical Book of Shadows or a physical journal. And there are some absolutely gorgeous, like leather-bound, handmade types of journals and Book of Shadows out there that you can just write everything in. You can get a 3-ring binder. You can get one of those. If you get just like a spiral notebook that has 3 subjects in it, and you're like, okay, the first subject, I'm going to write down all my spells. The second one's going to be rituals. The third one's going to be for journaling. Whatever format makes you happy, by all means, do that. Okay. So this all leads up. I hope that this episode was super informational for you. But I do want to make an announcement. Yay! Okay, so starting in March in the Ink Spirit Coven, the theme for the next year, which will run March until February, so March of 2025 to February of 2026, the theme is the Witch's Grimoire. I understand that March is next week if you are listening to this when this airs. Actually, March is at the end of this week. I get that. Look, I've been very busy. It's been very hard for me to make announcements and really put, kind of get office stuff done. Okay. So I know I should have been promoting this for a while now, but here I am. I'm going to tell you about it now. Okay. So the theme for the next year of the Ink Spirit Coven is the Witch's Grimoire. And the way I designed the program is to help members build their grimoire or their book of shadows, whatever you want to call it. I am calling it the Witch's Grimoire because my job here is going to be to supply members with information. Okay. And I'm actually going to be doing that on several different levels. This is what makes this year of the Ink Spirit Coven different from last year. Last year was Rewilding Your Inner Witch. I'm still carrying over some of it. So the Witch's Grimoire is going to be broken up into seasons. So we're starting with the spring, which is the element of air. So all of the themes for the months of March, April, and May will be air related. Okay. But what I'm going to be doing is when I give you all Book of Shadow pages for the lesson plans, when we do workshops and everything, I'm going to be giving you beginner, intermediate, and advanced witchcraft practices for each subject, okay? I'm going to be giving you information, and then you can apply it as you see fit to your magical practice. But the beautiful thing about this is there is something for everybody. I mean, there always has been with the Ink Spirit Coven. If you're a beginner witch, intermediate, advanced, we have them all in the Ink Spirit Coven. But the beautiful thing about this is now you have, if you're a beginner witch, and I'm teaching in the lesson beginner, intermediate, and advanced witchcraft practices, then you know where you're at. And you're like, okay, when it comes to this subject, I'm a beginner witch, but this is what I need to do to get into intermediate. Like, this is what I need to do to expand my practice. Or as I grow, these are the types of things I can do to grow myself in this area. So if you're a member and you print out the information or you save it, like the PDFs, you save it to your Google Drive or whatever, and 5 years from now, you can look back at it and be like, oh my gosh, I am now considered an intermediate witch when it comes to scrying or whatever it is. So I'm going to meet you where you're at now, but we're going to grow together. And if you don't even grow with me, you grow in the future, 5 years, 10 years now, you reference this stuff back, then you'll still have the information. That's what the Witch's Grimoire is all about. That's what the year of the Ink Spirit Coven is all about, is I'm going to meet you where you are, but I'm going to give you the tools to expand your practice whenever you are ready to expand your practice. Okay. You do not have to be a member for the whole year. If you do sign up for a year though, you have to stay in for a year. I apparently did not make that. I thought I did last year. I thought I made it super clear. I had one person that was like, no, you said I could leave whenever I wanted to. Okay, but you paid for a year. So we do have month to month. I leave the doors open. I do not close the doors to Ink Spirit Coven. So I do have month to month, which is $30 a month. If you decide, no, I'm in it for a year, it's $300 for the whole year, which comes out to $25 a month. But if you pay the $300, that's it. You're not going to get a refund if 3 months down the road, you're like, I don't want to do this anymore. Okay. Please understand that you have access to over 4 years of information in the archives. You have access to digital products. You could have downloaded every single digital product I had and then be like, never mind, I don't want to do this. I want my money back. And that's just really shitty. Okay. I'm going to be honest about it and throw it out there. So if you sign up for a year, you have access for a year to everything. I do one live lesson a month, one live workshop a month. Those are held on Zoom. They are recorded. They go into the lesson archive. So if you can't even make it live with us, you have access to it whenever you want to study it. I do give you Book of Shadow pages. Sometimes we do guided meditations and I record these cute little MP3s for you to download. But yeah, So that's going to start in March. Leading up to it, so the first full week of March, I will be hosting a free event on the website to give everyone a sneak peek inside the next year of the Ink Spirit Coven. I will have more details to come on that, so you'll just have to pay attention to our social media, our newsletters, things like that. But just as a reminder, because I have not thrown it out in forever, podcast 5, and that's all stuck together, and it's the number 5, get you $5 off your first month of the Ink Spirit Coven. Okay, so head to inkedspirit.com to learn more about the program. Hopefully by the time this airs, I will have switched over the landing page to the new stuff and it won't still say Rewilding Your Inner Witch at the top. Let's hope. Let's really hope. But look, you guys, if I could clone myself, I 100% would, because I have a lot to do. Okay? Anyway, the first class of the Witch's Grimoire is going to be Sunday, March 9th. So for the first week of March, the first full week, it's like the 2nd through the 8th, I'm going to be hosting like a free online event, kind of building up to it. And you're more than welcome to join that. But again, you'll have to pay attention to our newsletter, our social media, all of that to get more details on that, because I don't have them at the time of taping the podcast today. So I really hope that you will join me. You also have access to a private Facebook group. And then we meet in Zoom. There's a couple of new things this year that I'm doing with the Ink Spirit Coven for the next year. So yeah, head to inkspirit.com. And again, podcast 5, get you $5 off your first month to give us a try. It might also apply to the year. I'm not sure. We do have a free PDF thingy that we're sending out to people who do sign up for a year. I just haven't quite gotten it. Haven't looked over it yet. I haven't tweaked it. So it will be sent to you at some point. If you sign up for the whole year, you'll get like this cool free PDF thing. Okay. So for this week, in my Patreon bonus this week is basically a show and tell of some of my magical texts. I have them sitting right here for those of you on YouTube, and I have them sitting right here so that when I get done recording the podcast, I can just go directly into recording the Patreon bonus stuff. And I'm so excited because I love doing show and tells. I'm also going to give them a little bit more information on the next year of the Ink Spirit Coven, of the Witch's Grimoire. So if you want to be one of my paid Patreon members, the first tier gets you the bonus content. It's only $5 a month. You can head to patreon.com/inkgoddesscreations. And that is what I have for you all today. I hope that you found this episode extremely helpful, at least maybe to clear up a question I get asked a lot. So there's a lot of confusion over Grimoire, Book of Shadows. So hopefully today's episode helped you figure it out and figure out what you want to do and how you want to record your magical knowledge. So I want to thank you all for being here, for listening, for giving me a platform to share my magical knowledge. I really hope to see you in the Ink Spirit Coven. And if nothing else, I will see you all next week. Bye.